Yes, Mr. Robinson, it's Trevor Abramson here. Yes, you remember that Mr. Abdullah offered £350,000. Yes, well, I told him your asking price was 560, and I really think that if I can get an offer from him of £500,000, I would strongly recommend that you accept it. Yes, and may I stress that Mr. Abdullah has cash in hand. He's willing to close within 7 days, and he really is a rare purchaser indeed. Right. Okay. Well, I've got your solicitors, and I can reach you at your London office later on this afternoon.
Trevor Abramson is an estate agent who's used to talking in hundreds of thousands of pounds. That's why his own detached house in Hampstead is worth £250,000. Abramson is Mrs. Thatcher's entrepreneurial ideal. A risk-taking, thrusting capitalist who 5 years ago, aged only 21, set up in business with just a £5,000 bank loan.
With a tennis court and swimming pool is worth the extra, and I would strongly recommend you offering £500,000.
Today, his agency sells £35 million worth of property each year. For Abramson has discovered a lucrative vocation, selling the homes of Hampstead's richest Britons to even richer foreigners. As Abramson surveys the Finchley Road from his estate agent's office, the future looks good. Whatever the rest of the country thinks, he's backing Margaret Thatcher.
Well, I think she's got obvious direction. She gives confidence. I think she's got an enormously difficult task. And I think most of my clients, most of the potential investors, believe that that the light is at the end of the tunnel, although getting there won't be easy.
But how many of Trevor Abramson's neighbours share his confidence? How many of the thousands of Londoners who live and work in this part of the capital will follow Mrs. Thatcher to the end of the road? This is the Finchley Road, one of the longest thoroughfares in London, stretching from Westminster in the south to Finchley, Mrs. Thatcher's own constituency, in the north. Today, in the Queen's speech, the Prime Minister prescribed another round of treatment for our sick economy. We've come to the Finchley Road to find out how one part of London has been responding to 18 months of Mrs. Thatcher's medicine. 4.5 miles long, the Finchley Road begins in St John's Wood among blocks of mansion flats. It continues through cosmopolitan Swiss Cottage and prosperous Golders Green to the bland suburbia of Temple Fortune. It runs through 3 Tory-held constituencies and is peppered with small businesses run by people who looked to Mrs. Thatcher at the last election to revive their flagging fortunes. There are also thousands of Labour voters living here, but whatever their political loyalties, they're all preoccupied with the same thing: inflation. In Mrs. Thatcher's words, the biggest destroyer of all. A familiar figure jogging along the Swiss Cottage end of the Finchley Road is Dick Redding, a fighting-fit 77-year-old bachelor. Out of a total of £39 a week pension and social security, Dick has to pay £14.50 for his council flat in Langhorne Court. Dick isn't at all happy with Margaret Thatcher.
Since Margaret Thatcher's been in, I've been through my rent books and everything, and we've had 5 increases in rates and rents. So the last one was in September, the 29th of September. So £1.50 for 2 weeks increase on top of it. And you say that I get good money to live on. I've got to live. I've got to have the commodities of life. You can't get by on a little money today. You know, when I last had a drink was about 4 months ago. I can't afford to go over the Swiss and have a pint of beer now. I'm teetotal now. I don't smoke. I don't know where I'm living.
These days, it's government policy to raise pensions in line with prices. But Dick Redding is adamant that he's much worse off under Mrs Thatcher. He can't even afford running hot water.
I get all my hot water from the kettle, because if I put on the electricity on the cylinder, it takes about 4 hours to get hot, and it takes 50p every time you want it hot. And I can't afford to do that.
Like old people all over the country, Dick's angry that this year's pension increase has been put back by a fortnight, doing him out of £8. He won't accept Mrs Thatcher's argument that these days we all need to tighten our belts.
There seems to be plenty of money about for the top people. I saw it last night on television. I saw the ball at the Guildhall. Made you feel sick when you know what they're doing. I wonder, it must have cost thousands of pounds to put that on. And
that's the Lord
rubbish.
Mayor's dinner, you mean?
The Lord Mayor's dinner. And they're flaunting that, and all their jewellery was on them last night. I've only got a tin watch. That's all the jewellery I got. No, the people that's got it are getting more, and the people that haven't got it are getting less in value. I've only a few years to live. For God's sake, give me a decent living standard during them few years. And there's 6 million of us, pensioners. We've got no unions or anything to fight that and demand of... Get what I mean?
To Dick Redding, Mrs Thatcher would probably say all her policies are aimed at halting inflation and are already slowing it down. But at 77 years of age, Dick may not live long enough to see her succeed. But inflation hits younger people too, like Mrs Hannah Heafy and her 3 children who live in a council flat at the south end of the Finchley Road. She too by rising prices. She's just spent £12.50 for 3 days frugal feeding over the family weekend.
But you can only cut back so far. It's all right if it was just me and my husband, fair enough. When you've got 3 children running around the place, or even, you know, families with 4 and 5 children, you can only cut your food back so far. And then you're on the breadline then, you know, that's it. I mean, the children have got to have fruit, so people could tell me they've got to have eggs, we don't buy fresh fish anymore. I'm down to economy fish fingers, you know. They've got to have fresh bread, potatoes, and they've got to have fresh meat at least once a week. It is down to once a week now. They used to have it, they'd have chops in a week. No more. Chops now.
Hannah works for a firm of builders. While prices keep on rising, his income's been falling. The recession afflicting the whole housing industry has hit his employer. There's no overtime anymore.
Well, just last week I lost 7.5 hours because the government have cut back on all conversion, and money's been cut by £12 a week, and everything's going up. I just don't know what we're going to do for this time anyway, until things get straight again. What I take home now is 71 instead of 82.
Who did you vote for at the last election?
I voted for Mrs Thatcher at the last election. Before, I always voted Labour, but this time I voted for Mrs Thatcher because I thought she made a lot of sense. But if I knew then what I knew now, I would never have voted for her.
Soon the Heafys could be even worse off, because Hannah's own £20 a week school meals job may be abolished. Last year, it was working class votes that helped put Mrs Thatcher in power. But the opinion polls now show Labour 10% ahead. At number 671, further up the Finchley Road, is Ortoff Leather Goods, owned and run by Joe Friedman.
Well, about 1,000 in the meantime, just to... Well, make it 2 cartons, but anyway, tell him not to screw me on the price.
Inflation, Mrs Thatcher believes, is caused largely by printing too much money. To reduce the money supply, she has forced interest rates up to record levels. But this has hurt small businessmen like Joe, who voted for Mrs Thatcher at the last election.
I've heard all this before. Now listen, you know me well enough and you know me so many years. Now tell him to push the price down a few coppers less per foot and send it in to me. A couple of boxes.
In a small factory behind the shop and in his stores, Joe has 40 people working for him. He's built up a turnover of £500,000 a year, but like most businessmen, he's expanded on borrowed money. Today, he owes £200,000 to the bank and his suppliers. Interest payments of £600 a week are crippling his business.
This is the sheepskin. I think I can't send it out to top man. I don't think it's good enough. But these motorcycle ones.
We'll send those out and then we'll send these 10 out to Scotland, shall we?
Yeah, to Topman's shop in Dundee.
OK, fine.
Well, interest rates are affecting my business in a few ways. Number one, I have to work on quite a bit of borrowed capital. And when I have to pay a higher rate than other people do, or my competitors abroad do, obviously my costs are higher. And therefore, I'm not competing with them on level terms.
Joe Friedman exports 40% of what he makes, but the strong pound, buoyed up by those high interest rates, has drastically reduced the profit he can make selling abroad.
I went to a place in Amsterdam quite a few times, and after a while I managed to get an order. And I did supply the goods and everything was okay, and the person was very happy, and he repeated it. He repeated the order straight away, but all he said is that, Mr. Friedman, you must help me on the price. The exchange has gone up in the past few weeks, and unless you can do it at the old rate of exchange, no matter how much I would like your goods, we just won't be able to buy them. So I had to go along and reduce my prices.
How much profit had you been hoping for and how much did you have left?
Well, I was hoping for about 15%, which is not much, but since he's a new customer, I wanted to, he was like a loss leader to start with already. But afterwards, with the rate of exchange and taking all costs into account, hardly anything left. If it gets really bad, there is no question we'll have to lay off people, and especially, although they've been very loyal to me, including my subcontractors, and I'll find myself working in the same way as I started maybe years ago, myself, my wife, and maybe one more person, and just carry on that way to pay back my debts.
A mile away at 315 Finchley Road is Sporter, another business affected by high interest rates, but in a different way. The firm makes sports and outdoor clothes for advertising and promotion. Today, Sporter's owner, Bob Collins, has to get the approval of Heather Payne, who represents St Ivel.
Oh, that's tremendous.
They've ordered 500 body warmers to give away at a skating event.
You were having doubts about matching it with it being cotton and nylon.
It's a special dye, actually. Yeah.
And that badge has come up well. Let's try it, see what it looks like.
Yeah.
That's really good.
It's your size too.
Yeah, tremendous. It fits.
Bob has no problem these days finding the business. His difficulty is getting some of the big companies who are his customers to pay up. By sitting on his money, they use him as an interest-free bank. He's even had to go to a firm of debt collectors, Malcolm and Vicky Lawrence, who work at 315A Finchley Road.
We phoned the Bought Ledger department, and we're under the impression that the company has been told to pay slightly. It's a lot of big orders, Bob. If they are going to have a very big turnover, it stands to reason. You're much cheaper than the bank.
That's right, yes, I understand that, but they've always paid me 30 days.
Well, always,
I mean,
it's not now.
Do they give some excuse for it? Or?
Well, let me ask you this, Bob. Did they take advantage of your discount or the length of time in which they were going to pay? I mean, it was a 2.5% discount there, Bob. They never took advantage of it.
Well, what are you going to do about it?
Well, no, I'm not. I'm going to blow sky high on this company. Of course, it would be absolutely pathetic to sue them because it's going to take 3 months. If necessary, I should probably have to go up to the...
Well, I don't mind if you have to send anybody's toes, Vicky.
You don't care.
There's no point doing the business if they don't pay me.
No, that's fair enough. But I've got to tell you, because I mean, it's the policy of a lot of the big companies now. OK, so that one we can solve because there's certain... No, it is not it.
There's another one?
Mrs Thatcher's of high boosted Mr and Mrs Lawrence business by 40% in just 12 months. Debt collecting is booming. Malcolm Lawrence has the task of calling 7 every week.
All right, fine. What are your proposals, then? No, no, I'm sorry. I tell you what, I'll put a proposal to you. We're talking about 780 odd pounds. I want 480 pounds, maybe we'll make it 481 pounds 71, leaving a balance of 300 pounds. I want that up front, and I'll give you 7 days to pay the balance, and I'll have that in a post-dated cheque. That will give you the weekend trading. Yes, that's right. We'll give you the weekend trading to get you some money into the bank, and you'll be able to cover that second post-dated cheque. No, I think that's fair. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I think that is very fair. Right, okay. Well, I will expect that in the post. First class delivery today, I should get that tomorrow. So I expect those 2 cheques in the post tomorrow on my desk at 9 o'clock. But, I beg your pardon? A discount? You want a discount for paying?
Debt collectors are among the few people to benefit from high interest rates. For most businesses, small and large, it's been a disaster.
All right, no, we'll leave it like that. OK, I will hold this. I won't hold it after 10 o'clock tomorrow. I expect those 2 cheques on my desk tomorrow at 9:15.
The Lawrences, not surprisingly, support Mrs. Thatcher's efforts to bring the money supply under control. It's as high as 20% could even be good for companies, says Vicky, whatever the pain in the short term.
Because I think economically that it is a pill that has got to be swallowed by small businesses. I think it is a question of the survival of the fittest. I think that if a company does not overextend itself beyond its financial limits, it will survive and grow, albeit at the moment at a much smaller rate.
4 doors away at number 307 is Camden Borough Housing Office, where the other arm of Mrs. Thatcher's anti-inflation policy is striking hard: public spending cuts. Last year, the government knocked £9 million off Camden's housing grant.
Wendy Gray, Secretary of the Line, Rosemont, Thames.
Wendy Gray wants to know why plans to renovate decaying homes in Lythos Road, right next to the housing office, have been shelved indefinitely. Brendan Bergen, the Housing Development Officer, meets her to discuss the sorry prospect for her street.
Talk about it. Yes, we'll have a look down the road, shall we?
Looking at this particular street, I mean, we expected to rehabilitate the south side in total, virtually.
Quite.
On a rolling programme basis, and the north side across here. We thought, because the houses are so far gone, we would have no option but to redevelop them.
Right.
As things stand now, the rehabilitation programme has come to an end. There isn't money to rehabilitate the houses in the present financial year, or indeed in the next financial year, for that matter. There is some chance, in fact, that money mightn't even be available in the following financial year. As far as the redevelopment is concerned, I mean, that too has been shelved.
So, in other words, the fact that, I mean, this is where I live, in fact.
Yes.
Which is boarded up down here, because this was part of the rehabilitation programme.
Well, it was intended, in fact, that we would rehabilitate all the houses along here, yours included.
Yes.
But as you can see, it is now boarded up. And it's rather sad. It's not something which anybody likes.
No. And it's a direct result of the government's cuts, then, really.
Yes, it is.
But for Camden, the cuts are only beginning. The Labour borough has so far been reluctant to curb its spending, so the government is knocking another £5 million off Camden's rate support grant for next year as a punishment. At Swiss Cottage Baths at the south end of the road, local teenagers play basketball every night. Some have no jobs, like Roger Waif, aged 16, who left school in April. Public spending cuts, high interest rates and continuing inflation have taken their worst toll in jobs. In this area, 1 man in 12 is now unemployed. 3 times a week, Roger calls into the job centre in Finchley Road to look for work. In the last 8 months, the number of unemployed people registered here has risen by 50% to nearly 700, but the jobs on offer are down by 20%, and many of these nobody wants because the pay is so low. For Roger Waif, it's even worse. Few jobs are on the cards for boys of 16.
What sort of experience have you had?
I've worked in a computer place, fixing components and making up variables and all different things. It was only for 3 weeks.
Well, there's one thing that I can possibly think of, and that is locally there is a place where they do some sort of engineering work, electronics, the North London Vehicle Repair Workshop. It's on the Finchley Road next to the Broad Street station, you know, Finchley Road Fraud station, we might be able to arrange for you to go along and see them there.
The vehicle repair workshop at number 335 is run as part of the Youth Opportunities programme, which Mrs. Thatcher has gone out of her way to support. The pay during the 9 months training course is only £23 a week, but 3/4 of recent trainees have found jobs.
Well, unfortunately, of course, you know, in view of the state of affairs in the country at the moment, you know, where virtually it's becoming a question of survival, isn't it, you know? As far as this particular establishment is concerned, that's all we can offer you: carpentry, general engineering, or motor mechanics. Now, how long have you been out of work?
5 months.
5 months. Have you been after many jobs?
Yeah, about 6, 7 jobs.
6 or 7 jobs. You must be becoming quite disillusioned, are you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if it's any consolation to you, my dear boy, you're not the only one. There's been quite a few lads along here, and that's why when we have a waiting list for this project. We have over 20 kids waiting to come onto it, you know.
Yeah.
So what can I say?
Well, Roger, there are no jobs here, even if you wanted one, so what's your next move?
Go back to the job centre.
But Roger will have to be quick, for only last week the government said it's thinking about closing 672 job centres throughout Britain. Mrs. Thatcher's policies are, of course, working well for Glentree Estates, if not for many other people in the Finchley Road. Trevor Abramson's convinced that however bleak it might seem to the natives, the foreign investor sees Britain as a land of hope, bursting with opportunity. Have you had any offers for this place?
There have been 2 offers. At the moment, none of them are acceptable. But we're working on it.
Not enough money, you mean?
Not enough money.
Now, the asking price on this house is over £400,000, and most of your buyers seem to be foreigners. Why on earth should they want to invest in Mrs. Thatcher's Britain when the pound is so high?
Well, England has always been, for a foreign investor, a very safe place to invest money. It's got a politically stable environment. Over a 5-year investment term, they're likely to benefit by quite a substantial capital appreciation. As far as the foreign investor is concerned, she is a lady who is adopting a very confident policy. She's got an obvious direction. She's highly regarded in foreign countries. They will pay certainly a higher consideration due to the higher pound than they would have paid perhaps 3 years ago. But I think her confidence, the overall investment, capital appreciation on their investment outweighs the disadvantage of the higher pound. And I think that Mrs. Thatcher, as far as I'm concerned, and I can bring in a good part of £35 million worth of investment into this country from foreign investment, from foreign investors, it's certainly her policies are working for me.
But if rich foreigners admire Mrs. Thatcher, what's the Finchley Road's overall verdict on her? At number 202 are Gallup, the opinion pollsters. We commissioned them to carry out a survey of their own street. Half the people interviewed work in the Finchley Road, the other half live in it. As we know from past elections, the road has a built-in Tory bias. Asked how they felt about Mrs. Thatcher's performance as Prime Minister, 39% said they were satisfied and 48% said they were dissatisfied. When asked about voting, 63% of those who voted last time voted Conservative. But if there were an election tomorrow, only 49% said they'd vote Tory, a remarkably low figure for a staunchly Tory area. If this pattern were to be repeated in marginal seats all over Britain, Labour would win a general election by a landslide. As a new session of Parliament begins, the message for Mrs. Thatcher seems to be, while most of your supporters are prepared to keep taking the medicine, you've lost the support of those voters who floated your way last time and who put you in power. At least, that's how it looks from the Finchley Road.
I think that her policies must be given a chance. I think
that they will work.
And, if an election was to happen again, I'll definitely vote for the Conservative Party again.
I'm one of the people that doesn't support Mrs. Thatcher anymore.